You might have heard about the farmers' protests in the Netherlands, spreading to other European countries and even to Canada. Unfortunately, this huge movement has not been properly covered by the mainstream media, and we can only learn about it by digging through social media platforms. The Dutch government decided to introduce environmental regulations to the country's farming sector that will ultimately bankrupt about 30% of its farmers, with similar reduction in agricultural and meat output. The Dutch government claims its new set of environmental regulations intend to save the planet from global warming by decreasing the farm's methane gas emissions. Other governments have given indication they will follow similar procedures. New Zealand's Prime Minister wants to impose a fine to farmers who own burping cows, and Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has told the province's premiers his government will reduce fertilizer use by Canada's farmers in the name of reducing methane emissions. The leaders of Netherlands, New Zealand, and Canada, respectively Mark Rutte, Jacinda Ardern, and Justin Trudeau, graduated as young leaders from the World Economic Forum in Davos. But this is of course just a coincidence. The restrictions imposed by these governments, which threaten the bankruptcy of many farmers and ranchers in their own countries, precisely at a time when global shortages are feared, are being made under the pretext of reducing the emission of methane gas. In this video, we're going to see that these governments are hurting their own citizens to solve a problem that does not exist or that exists in a negligible fashion. We will also discuss how Brazil is devising an ingenious solution that will both satisfy the climate lobby and preserve its beef industry. Hysteria about the impact of CH4, the methane, on climate change has reached a recent climax with pronouncements in the media that at least 25% of today's global warming is driven by methane from human actions. This is not the case, and let us see why. This misunderstanding has been clarified in detail in an extensive paper being prepared for publication by Professor William van Wijngaarden from York University and by Professor William Harper from Princeton University. Link to a summary of this paper is in the description box. Their new paper compares the radiative forcings of methane and carbon dioxide. Radiative forcings are disturbances that alter the Earth's climate. Radiative forcing is normally specified in watts per square meter. The largest source of CH4 in the atmosphere is emissions from cows and other livestock in burps from animals' mouths during rumination, not farts, as is popularly believed, together with decay of animal dung. Natural gas is mostly CH4, and large quantities of CH4, methane, are sequestered on the seafloor as methane clathrates. Here's a summary of their findings. For current concentrations of greenhouse gases, the radiative forcing at the tropopause per added CH4 molecule is about 30 times larger than the forcing per added carbon dioxide molecule. This is due to the heavy saturation of the absorption band of the abundant greenhouse gas CO2. But the rate of increase of CO2 molecules, about 2.3 parts per million per year, is about 300 times larger than the rate of increase of CH4 molecules, which has been around 0.0076 parts per million since the year 2008. So, the contribution of methane to the annual increase in forcing is 1/10 that of carbon dioxide. The net forcing from methane to CO2 increases is about 0.05 watts per meter square per year. This will cause a temperature increase of about 0.012 degrees centigrade per year. Just that by itself allows us to say that proposals to place harsh restrictions on methane emissions because of warming fears are not justified by facts. Let us detail that a bit. To show how small an impact of CH4 actually is on global warming in comparison with CO2, van Wijngaarden and Harper calculated the outgoing radiation spectrum for various greenhouse gases at the top of the atmosphere. Look at this figure. It shows the calculated spectral forcing as a function of wave number or the spatial frequency. The blue curve is the spectrum for an atmosphere without any greenhouse gases and transparent to thermal radiation. The black curve is the spectrum including all greenhouse gases. Now, let us concentrate on the CH4 band. Removing the CH4 results in the green curve. Now, look at the red line. It represents a doubling of the CH4 concentration from its present 1.9 parts per million to 3.8 parts per million. The red curve is barely distinguishable from the black curve. The minuscule decrease in the area underneath the curve, from black to red, as the CH4 level doubles, corresponds to a total force increase of 0.8 watts per square meter at the top of the whole atmosphere. Concerning the attribution of 25% of global warming to methane, CH4, mentioned above, it probably comes from comparing the forcing increase of 0.8 watts per square meter for doubled CH4 to the 3 watts per square meter additional forcing for doubling the CO2, 0.8 being approximately 25% of 3. The problem with this reasoning is that it completely ignores the much smaller concentration of CH4 relative to CH2 and a much smaller rate of increase from year to year. According to NOAA, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the current CH4 concentration is about 1.9 parts per million, 2 orders of magnitude lower than the CO2 level of approximately 415 parts per million. Combining the forcing calculations with the concentration data, the forcing per added molecule of CH4 is about 30 times larger than it is for CO2. But the rate of increase in the level of CH4 over the last 10 years, namely 0.0076 parts per million per year, is about 300 times smaller than the rate of increase in the CO2 level, which is around 2.3 parts per million per year. This means the contribution of CH4 to the annual increase in forcing is only 1/10 of that of CO2. Even if the rate of CH4 concentration doubles, its contribution to the force increase would still be just 1/5 of the CO2 contribution. That's nowhere near the claim that methane is roughly 25 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. It will not be any different in the future. Using average rates of increase for CH4 and CO2 concentrations from the past, it is possible to evaluate forcings at the top of the troposphere for the next 50 years. In the figure, the forcings in watts per square meter in the vertical axis are increments relative to today, counted in years in the horizontal axis. The figure shows that both CH4 and CO2 projected forcings will be small compared to the total forcing within half-century from now. Panic over methane, or even CO2, is completely unjustified. Nonetheless, there is a very strong international climate lobby, and there are several international agreements, such as the Global Commitment to Reduce Methane Emissions, signed during COP26 last year in Glasgow. Brazil, as signatory to this agreement, is bound to it. The ingenuity of Brazilian researchers is coming up with a solution. Researchers from Embrapa, the Brazilian Agricultural Research Cooperation, and Mapa, the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply, have developed techniques to reduce methane emissions from livestock. These techniques include the genetic improvement of pastures and animals, the use of additives that can be added to animal feed, and diet control through confinement. The genetic improvement of pastures serves to develop more digestible food for cattle, as the production of methane gas occurs during the rumination, and the better the digestion, the less methane is produced. The genetic improvement of the animals allows an early slaughter. According to the president of Embrapa, in the last 10 years, Brazil reduced the slaughter time from 48 to 36 months. When the animal spends less time in the field, it will produce less methane. The use of additives that can be added to animal feed includes corn, sorghum, soybeans, and cotton. There is also a supplement being tested by a Swiss company based on garlic and citrus extracts, also mixed with cattle feed. There is also the issue of confinement. The confinement of cattle allows a control of the diet, which reduces the production of methane gas. But once the animal is released, the pasture sequesters the carbon. In this case, a form of management between the two would be necessary. The challenge is to make all ranchers, including small ones, able to use these novelties. According to the Secretary of Mapa, this depends on the support of the private sector, the third sector, and various entities that take technology to the field. For Brazil, this is of course extremely important, as the country is the largest beef exporter in the world, and livestock is one of the pillars of the economy, employing more than 1.5 million people. In 2020, the gross value of production in livestock was over $350 billion. Brazil is showing that it's possible to optimize livestock production, satisfying the demands created by international agreements. Congratulations to Brazilian researchers and technicians. The question now becomes, will the climate change lobby like the Brazilian solution, or will they insist on shutting down Brazil's beef industry?